There's a moment that hits harder than anything in parenting. It doesn't happen when your child is beaming with pride or when they curl into your arms after a long day. It happens when their eyes flash with something darker, when they lie, when they scream, when they say something so cold, so calculating, that for a split second you wonder if you're raising a stranger. It's not a moment you talk about at dinner parties. You don't post it online, but it sticks deep. And it brings a question with it, a question so heavy, so raw, that most parents only whisper it in their minds. What's wrong with my child? But that question has a shadow of its own, because right behind it, there's another one, more shameful, more paralyzing. Did I do something wrong? This is the fear no one talks about. The fear that the child you love is becoming something you don't understand. The fear that their behavior is a window into something broken, that it might be your fault, that you're watching a mistake unfold in real time and you're powerless to stop it. But what if those fears, those darkest thoughts, are pointing in the wrong direction? What if your child's most troubling behaviors aren't signs of something wrong with them, but signals from a part of them that's gone unseen? Carl Jung called it the shadow. The side of us we're told not to show, the feelings we learn to hide, the parts we believe we must exile in order to be loved. And what most people don't realize is this: children have a shadow too, not because they're broken, but because they're learning what's safe to express and what isn't. They cry too loudly and someone says, "Stop being dramatic." They get angry and they're told to go to their room. They show off and they're told they're selfish. Slowly, they learn the rules of being acceptable, of being loved. And they start hiding the parts that don't fit the mold, but those parts don't disappear. They leak out. Sometimes they show up as lies, as tantrums, as defiance, as silence. Sometimes they appear at the worst possible time in the most confusing way. And parents, being human, react. We get angry, we shut down, we reach for consequences that make the behavior stop. But stopping it isn't the same as understanding it, because what if your child's worst moment isn't the problem, it's the messenger? What if that meltdown at the grocery store wasn't about the candy, but about powerlessness? What if the lie wasn't manipulation, but fear? What if the cruel words weren't a reflection of their character, but a reflection of pain they don't know how to name? These aren't just behaviors, they're signals from the shadow. And this is the moment where parenting becomes more than management. It becomes alchemy. Because to meet your child's shadow, you have to face your own. You have to look at the parts of you that weren't safe to show as a child. The anger you had to suppress. The needs you weren't allowed to express. The tears you had to swallow, because the shadow doesn't start with them, it starts with us. But here's the truth that no one told you. Your child is not bad, and you are not failing. You are being called into something deeper, because behavior is language, and the shadow is a voice that doesn't use words. So instead of asking, "How do I fix this?" ask, "What is this showing me?" Instead of asking, "Why are they acting this way?" ask, "What part of them is finally asking to be seen?" And more than that, what part of me is being invited to heal? If you can hold that question, if you can pause long enough to hear what's underneath the surface, then everything changes. This isn't just about parenting anymore, it's about liberation, theirs and yours. No child begins life fragmented. They are born whole. They cry when they're hungry. They laugh when they're delighted. They scream when something feels wrong. There is no mask, no filter, no shame. And then the splitting begins. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in tiny, invisible ways. A disapproving glance, a withheld hug, a sharp word said in frustration. A parent overwhelmed, doing their best, but unintentionally teaching their child which parts of themselves are welcome and which are not. A child who's loud is told to use their inside voice. A child who's sensitive is told to stop crying. It's not a big deal. A child who's curious is told, "Don't ask so many questions." These aren't always cruel words. Often they come from love, from fear, from exhaustion, but they teach the child something enduring. be less of yourself, to be loved more. Robert Bly called it the bag we drag behind us. As we grow up, we begin placing pieces of ourselves into that bag. Emotions, instincts, truths that we believe make us unlovable. And by the time we're adults, most of us are dragging around a lifetime of hidden parts. But here's what most don't realize. Children start filling their bag early. By age 4, they've already absorbed more messages than we can count about what's good, what's bad, what earns affection, and what triggers distance. They start rehearsing versions of themselves that feel safe, the polite one, the funny one, the helpful one, and they slowly hide the rest. But the shadow doesn't stay quiet. It shows up in the child who seems too much, the child who talks back, the child who goes quiet when something's wrong, the child who suddenly can't sleep or starts acting out at school. These are the symptoms. But the cause is deeper. It's the disowning of self. And the tragedy is this. The shadow isn't filled with evil, it's filled with brilliance, with gold. Jung believed that the shadow contains not just darkness, but buried light. The qualities we suppressed to survive. The courage mistaken for aggression, the curiosity mislabeled as defiance, the emotion dismissed as weakness. What your child hides to be loved might be the very thing they need to thrive. But there's more, because the shadow your child carries may not even be theirs. Children absorb the emotions we don't express. They carry what we deny. If you had to be perfect to earn love, your child's mistakes may trigger something deep in you. If you were never allowed to be angry, their rage may feel intolerable. If you were told not to cry, their tears might feel like defiance instead of grief. And so we react, not to them, but to our past. This is how generational wounds pass silently through families. Not through genetics, but through energy, through nervous systems that were never taught to feel safe with the full spectrum of emotion. But that cycle can end. It ends the moment you pause, the moment you choose to look not just at your child's behavior, but at what it stirs in you. The shadow is never the enemy. The real danger is pretending it's not there. And your child, they don't need a perfect parent. They don't need someone who never gets triggered. They need someone willing to notice when they are. Because when you can say, this part of you is safe with me, you teach them something the world never taught you, that they can be whole. Even when they're messy, even when they're struggling, even when they don't know who they are yet. And maybe so can you. That's how the shadow begins to heal. Not in silence, not in punishment, but in presence. In a parent who says, I see all of you, and I'm not going anywhere. It doesn't walk into the room wearing a label. It doesn't arrive with a warning. It just shows up, often when you're least prepared. A slammed door, a lie you weren't expecting, a tantrum that explodes without reason, and suddenly you're staring at a version of your child you don't recognize, a version that pushes every button, that makes you question everything you thought you knew. This is where most parents start to panic. They reach for the rule book, they raise their voice, they wonder, where did this come from? But what if that behavior isn't random? What if it's the shadow trying to speak? The shadow doesn't use polite language, it doesn't ask for permission, it shows up in the form of what we're taught to reject: lying, aggression, withdrawal, disobedience, manipulation. But underneath those behaviors is always the same thing: a child who doesn't feel safe to express what they're actually feeling. When a child lies, it's often not because they're deceitful, it's because the truth feels dangerous. A child might lie about breaking something not out of defiance, but out of fear, fear of rejection, fear of punishment, fear that the truth might cost them your love. When a child lashes out, it's rarely about the thing they're yelling about. The shadow doesn't throw tantrums just for candy. It erupts when a child feels powerless. It erupts when they've been holding something in too long. It erupts when they don't have the words or the safety to explain what's really going on inside. And sometimes the shadow whispers. It doesn't scream, it shuts down, it sulks. It refuses to make eye contact. The child who retreats might not be rude, they might be overwhelmed, they might be carrying shame, they might be playing out a script you didn't even know you handed them. And this is the part that no one wants to talk about. Sometimes what you're seeing in your child is your own reflection. The behaviors that frustrate you most often point to the places inside you that haven't healed. If you were told to stay small, your child's boldness might feel like rebellion. If you were never allowed to cry, your child's tears might feel manipulative. If you had to be perfect, your child's mistakes might feel personal. The shadow is a mirror, and your child, in all their mess and confusion, is holding it up to you. But before that mirror becomes a source of shame, let it become a source of truth, because it means you now have a chance to do what generations before you could not respond differently. One mother discovered this during what seemed like a typical weekday battle. Her 7-year-old daughter had been sneaking snacks from the kitchen and hiding them under her bed. The mother, already overwhelmed, confronted her sharply. "Why would you lie to me again?" she asked, her voice tight. The girl looked away, started to cry, and finally whispered, "Because I don't know when you'll be mad at me next. I just wanted something to feel better. It wasn't about the snacks, it never was." That one sentence cracked the surface of what looked like bad behavior and revealed something raw, something true. The child wasn't acting out of defiance. She was reacting to instability, to fear. And the lie, however frustrating, was a survival tactic. This is what the shadow does when it has no place to go. It finds a way to survive. But here's the turning point. When we stop reacting to the behavior and start listening to the message, everything changes. A tantrum becomes a clue. A lie becomes a cry for safety. A shutdown becomes an opportunity for connection. This isn't about excusing everything your child does. It's about asking better questions. Instead of "How do I stop this?" ask, "What is this trying to tell me?" Instead of "Why are they doing this to me?" ask, "What part of them isn't being heard?" And somewhere in that shift, you'll notice something surprising. The chaos softens, the distance shrinks, and the behavior you thought was defiance begins to transform into dialogue. Not always immediately, not perfectly, but steadily, authentically. Right here between reaction and understanding is where the magic happens. But this is also the moment where most viewers click away, right when it gets uncomfortable. Right when it requires reflection, right when it begins to touch something personal. So let me ask you to stay. And if you've ever had a moment where your child's behavior cracked something open in you, something deep, something you didn't expect, take a second and share it in the comments. Someone else might need to see your story to understand their own, because the shadow is never healed in isolation. It's healed in community, in reflection, in the courageous act of saying, "This made me look deeper." And now, as we move into the next chapter, we step into the most pivotal moment of all, the one where your response becomes the fork in the road. Because what you do when the shadow appears determines whether your child learns to hide it deeper or bring it into the light. There's a pause that lives between a child's mistake and your response. A pause that doesn't always feel like a choice. The behavior comes fast, the scream, the shove, the lie, and something inside you ignites. You hear yourself say things you promised you wouldn't. You see your face harden in the ways you swore you'd never mirror. And in that moment, it's not just your child's shadow on display, it's yours. What happens next is everything. You're standing at a fork in the road. One path is well worn. It's the one your parents may have taken, the one lined with punishment, silence, shame. It's quick, it's reactive, it gets immediate results, but it also teaches your child something they'll carry for the rest of their life, that love can be withdrawn, that approval is conditional, that certain parts of them are dangerous to show. This is how shame begins, not in grand betrayals, but in small repeated moments when a child feels less loved in their worst moments. And shame doesn't just change behavior, it changes identity. The child who hears, "What's wrong with you?" enough times stops asking that question about their actions and starts asking it about themselves. But there is another path. It's slower, more demanding. It doesn't feel as satisfying in the moment. It asks you to breathe when you want to break, to lean in when you want to walk away, to get curious when everything in you wants to control. It asks you to see the behavior not as a threat, but as a signal. When your child lashes out, instead of demanding, "What were you thinking?" you ask, "What were you feeling?" When they lie, instead of snapping, "Don't you ever lie to me again," you ask, "What made you feel like you had to hide the truth?" This doesn't mean there are no consequences. It means the consequence is delivered with connection, not condemnation. And this is where the science backs the soul. Emotional regulation isn't taught through fear, it's modeled through presence. A child's nervous system syncs to yours. If you're grounded, they can ground. If you stay, they learn it's safe to stay with themselves, even when they've made a mess. One father learned this after years of reacting harshly to his son's outbursts. It wasn't until his son started flinching at raised voices, even gentle ones, that he realized the fear wasn't about discipline anymore. It was about survival. So he tried something different. The next time his son acted out, he sat down beside him and said, "I see that you're angry. That's okay. Let's talk when you're ready." The first few times, it didn't go well. The boy pushed him away, screamed louder, but the father stayed, quiet, present. And one day, after a particularly hard outburst, his son broke down crying. Not from fear, but from relief. "You didn't leave," he said. "That's it. That's the work, being the one who stays. Especially when you weren't stayed with. Especially when you weren't taught how. Because that's what rewires the story. Not being perfect, but being present, not having the answers, but being willing to sit in the discomfort long enough to hear the truth underneath. So, when the moment comes, and it will come, pause. Feel the fork in the road, and choose the path that leads to healing, even if it's harder, even if it's quieter, even if it asks you to confront every part of yourself you once had to bury. Because the way you respond to your child's shadow becomes the way they respond to their own, and in that single moment a legacy is rewritten. By now, you've seen it. The moments that used to feel like disobedience now reveal themselves as desperation. The behaviors that once felt like threats are starting to look more like clues. And what comes next isn't about reacting faster or being stricter. It's about becoming the kind of parent who no longer sees the shadow as something to eliminate, but as something to understand. The first shift begins with you, because your child's behavior is not just a test of patience, it's an invitation to self-awareness. When your child's anger ignites your own, when their silence triggers a wave of rejection, when their disobedience makes you feel like a failure, that's your shadow speaking. The child in front of you is real, but so is the child inside you. And both are asking to be seen. This isn't about blame, it's about consciousness. The more you understand your own emotional reflexes, the less likely you are to pass them down. Because it's not your mistakes that hurt your child most, it's your unwillingness to look at them. So when a behavior pushes you too hard, ask yourself, what part of me is being touched right now? Is this about them, or about something in me that still needs healing? That question alone creates the space your child needs to feel safe. But awareness is just the beginning. What your child needs next is language, because the shadow thrives in silence. It grows in places where emotions have no name. So give them words, give them maps. Say what they're too overwhelmed to say themselves. "I see you're really frustrated right now. That makes sense." It's hard when things feel out of control. You're angry, and maybe underneath that you're feeling sad. Let's sit with it together. This isn't weakness, it's leadership. You're not rescuing them from their feelings, you're teaching them how to stay with their feelings without fear. That's emotional literacy. That's the foundation of self-trust. And when words aren't enough, let them draw. Let them build their shadow with crayons and cardboard and wild stories. Ask them, if your anger were a creature, what would it look like? Sit with them while they make it. Ask what it needs, what it fears, what it wants to say. These aren't just games, they're doorways. When a child can personify their emotion, they no longer feel possessed by it. They feel partnered with it. The same goes for storytelling. Read them tales where the hero isn't perfect, where the monster isn't slain but understood. Tell them about the wild boy who befriends the dragon inside him. About the quiet girl who learns that sadness is not her enemy, but her gift. And don't just read the stories, ask them what they saw, what they felt, what they would do if that dragon showed up in their room. Because the stories we tell become the beliefs they carry. And so do the rituals we create. Give them a space in the house that says, here, all parts of you are welcome. A feelings corner, a pillow that's only for yelling into, a notebook where they can write their secrets without judgment. Create a ritual where once a week you both write down one emotion you felt that week that was hard to say out loud, and then you talk about it. Or don't, just listen. Let them feel you sitting with their shadow without trying to fix it. And when things fall apart, as they will, repair. Always repair. After the yelling, after the silence, after the slam of the door, return, even if they don't, even if they roll their eyes or refuse to answer. Come back anyway. I didn't like how I handled that. I got triggered. I'm sorry. I'm learning too. That moment matters more than almost anything else. Because it teaches your child that love is not something that disappears when things get hard. It's something that expands. You may think they're not listening, but they are. You may think it's too late, it isn't. A parent's willingness to return after rupture is one of the most powerful gifts a child will carry into adulthood. It teaches them that relationships aren't defined by conflict, but by what happens after. And the message they carry becomes this: I am safe to mess up, I am safe to be emotional, I am safe to be in process. That safety turns into resilience. And that resilience becomes the cornerstone of emotional maturity. This doesn't mean your home becomes conflict-free. It means conflict becomes meaningful. Instead of being feared, it becomes an opportunity, a mirror, a lesson in being human. And perhaps most powerfully of all, it becomes a place where your child learns to love their own shadow, not fear it, not run from it, but recognize it as the most honest part of themselves. The part that's not afraid to speak, the part that says, I'm heard, instead of hiding it, the part that says, I'm angry and knows they won't be abandoned, the part that knows, I don't have to perform to belong. That's what you're building. A child who doesn't have to split themselves in two to feel loved. A home where wholeness is not the exception, it's the expectation. A legacy that won't have to be healed again in the next generation. Not because you were perfect, but because you were present. There comes a moment, quiet, unremarkable, when everything you've been doing starts to show. Not in a grand apology, not in some tidy resolution, but in a simple moment when your child does something that stops you cold. They tell you the truth, even though they know it will upset you. They ask for help. Instead of acting out, they pause before lashing out, take a breath and say, I'm really angry right now. And in that moment you realize, this is it. This is the result of all the staying, the reflecting, the returning. This is the shadow no longer needing to scream to be heard. Your child doesn't become perfect, but they become whole. And that is everything. Because a child who learns to bring their whole self to the table becomes an adult who doesn't live in hiding. They become someone who doesn't fold in the face of big feelings. Someone who can say, this is hard, and not collapse. Someone who can face truth, discomfort, vulnerability, and stay present. But what you may not realize until it's already happening is that as they heal, so do you. Because this work was never one-sided. As you gave your child language, you found your own. As you stayed with them in their tantrums, you learned to stay with your own discomfort. As you returned after rupture, you began to forgive the parts of yourself you thought were unforgivable. You stopped parenting from fear and started parenting from truth, the same truth you were once told to hide. You found the child in you, the one who had to perform or shrink or stay quiet to stay safe, and you gave them something they never had: permission. Permission to feel, to fail, to be angry, to cry, to be whole. And that changes everything. It changes how you show up in your relationships, in your work, in your silence. It ripples through how you love, how you forgive, how you stand your ground. Because you're not reacting anymore, you're responding. You're not passing down the legacy of suppression, you're passing down the legacy of presence. And maybe one day your child will be sitting across from someone they love, a partner, a friend, a child of their own, and in a moment of tension they'll pause, take a breath, and stay. Not because they memorized it from a book, because they lived it with you. Because they remember that their worst moments didn't cost them your love. Because they were taught that the shadow isn't something to run from, it's something to bring into the light. And when that happens, when that moment passes from you to them, a generational wound closes. You were the one who stood at the edge of the old story and said, this ends with me. So if this spoke to you, don't let it stay silent. Share it with a parent who needs to know they're not alone in this. Leave a comment below. What's one moment when your child's behavior cracked something open in you? Something unexpected, something true. Because when we speak the unspoken, we give others permission to see themselves. This isn't just about parenting anymore. This is about healing, one shadow at a time.